Hello and welcome back. This video is a follow-up to a follow-up really, as I've already made two videos about the FZ1. While the first one focused on how to replace the disk drive, the second one is more of a general review. So if you haven't checked out the second video, maybe give it a try after this one. Also, many things I'll talk about in this video require you to replace your old disk drive with a floppy emulator or GoTech drive. So you actually might want to check out that video too. What I planned to do when I started this video was to give a more detailed look at the sample editing process on the FZ1, as it looked to me that it has some interesting features. I had planned on using a number of samples I had specifically picked to showcase the on-machine editing. Instead of simply sampling them the old-fashioned way via the audio in input, I thought I had worked out a much faster and more convenient way to do so. After all, I had already installed a disk drive emulator that can read disk images off a USB drive. So of course, at least I thought, I can simply add samples to the disk image and conveniently load them off the virtual disk drive. Little did I know that, for a number of reasons, this wasn't going to be as easy as I thought it would be. And that could have been pretty simple, but life had other plans for me. Well, let's start this journey with a little bit of technical insight. The Casio FZ1 can record and play samples in 16-bit. This number basically describes the stepping that is made when analog sound sources are recorded. The more bit, the higher the vertical bit depth, the more natural the sound. Next numbers that are important for us are 9000 kHz, 18,000 kHz and 36,000 kHz. These numbers describe the number of samples that are recorded per second. So again, the higher the horizontal sample rate, the more natural the reproduction of the sound. Go down and it will sound more lo-fi. While you can't change the bit resolution to achieve 8-bit or 12-bit lo-fi sound, you can choose between 9, 18 and 36 kHz 16-bit sampling. So the first thing we have to make sure is that the samples we want to use are converted into the right resolution. This is about the easiest part of this process. In Odyssey, for example, you can manually change the project sample rate in the lower left corner. Just type 9000 and save as a WAV file. Next, another three terms that are important for our endeavor are FZV, FZB and FZF. These are the formats individual samples, sample banks and full disk images are saved into, when you save data to the disk or dump data via MIDI or parallel cable. So to make samples readable for the FZ1, you need to turn them into FZV or FZB files. Also, in order to be able to get samples in via the drive emulator, we need FZF files, because these are the only ones that can be directly converted into disk images compatible with the GoTech drive emulator. And this is exactly the point where things get a bit difficult. There actually exists a Windows tool that can send and receive FZV and FZB files from and to the FZ1. This tool was created for Windows 95 but still works perfectly fine on modern Windows. I've personally tested it on Windows 11. It's a bit basic, but it gets the job done. What it can do though is convert wave samples into FZV files. So we need to find a way to convert samples into FZVs. Here things actually get a little easier again, or at least in theory, because there's a software that can do this, namely Awave Studio. Awave is a program that can read, convert and sample a ton of ancient sample formats. It can create individual FZVs, full FZB banks and even FZF disk images we need to be able to conveniently store them on a disk emulator's USB or SD drive. This all is great news, but comes at a price that is $100. There's a shareware version of Awave Studio that lets you save individual FZVs and FZBs for free. These can then be transferred with the file transfer tool and saved to the virtual disk drive image. If you want the full convenience and speed though, you will need to churn out the money for the software, because sending samples via MIDI takes a rather long time, upwards of 10 to 15 minutes for very large banks. Of course, if you still have a computer that comes with a parallel port, you can also build your own cable to transfer files much faster. The transfer tool also supports transfer via parallel port, so all you need is to build your own cable in an actual parallel port. USB parallel port adapters will very likely not work in this case, because they only emulate certain functionalities of the parallel port. So, to sum up, you can get your own samples into the FZ1 digitally without sampling them through the analog audio in. You need to convert them into the correct sample rate and format and then transfer them with the file transfer tool. You can also make life a lot easier with the full version of Awave Studio. It can create full disk images you can conveniently load via a disk emulator. A thing that really bugs me here is that at one point in history we were extremely close to another very convenient solution, as someone actually created an editing and librarian software for the FZ1 that even had file transfer functionality. The ancient Steinberg software for Atari ST already proved that this was technically possible. The project site is still up and I even found some long defunct links to a beta version, but sadly this never materialized. So with this part taken care of, let's have a look at the actual on-machine editing. For a machine from 1987, yet alone one that was considered a budget or poor man's sampler, the FZ1 comes with quite extensive on-machine editing capabilities. You really can call it convenient or easy to use from today's perspective, but back in 87 the graphic display and the tools provided must have been awesome, as they probably made editing feel a lot less cryptic than on other contemporary machines. Once you record the sample, you can use a graphical representation of the sample to set start, end and loop points, truncate the sample or edit VCA or VCF envelopes instead of working with only cryptic number values. But that is not all, as there are a number of extended sample editing features that probably were mostly intended to efficiently work with the limited sample space available, but those can also be abused to create interesting results. Let's start with a mostly useless but fun feature. When creating a voice, which is the smallest building block to create an instrument from a sample, the last section, Tune Memory Read, has a little surprise. As you would guess from the name, you can fine-tune the sample and also select if the sample is played forward, backward or is cued. This unique feature lets you play the sample with the pitch wheel, creating some cheap-ass scratching effect. Next, let's look at cut sample, which is a method to use parts of an existing sample as a source for new samples, all without using additional memory. Originally, I thought this would work like a feature that lets me cut up drum loops to use individual parts as a single hit drum sound, but it turned out that the waveforms you can extract this way are actually much shorter, more like single cycle waveforms. And this is actually where things can get really interesting, because you can use the FZ1 as the world's worst wavetable synth this way too. By setting up start and end points of the cutout, you can play the sound on the keyboard to addition the selected part. Moving start and end times manually, you can scan through the waveform in similar fashion to a wavetable synth. It can be very choppy, especially when scrolling through quickly, like I will do in this demo, and it can sound really harsh, but you can end up with some really interesting results too. Mix Right is the next editing feature probably intended to save some memory. With the introduction of sampled waveforms, the common technique was to combine an attack sample with a loop waveform to create more realistic sounding instruments. As the name suggests, Mix Right lets you mix two individual sounds into a new sample. A number of parameters can be set before resampling takes place, which creates a new sampled waveform that is a mix of the two waveforms we set up to be mixed. Some of the parameters that can be set before resampling can lead to interesting results when you combine copies of the same sample. Detuning, for example, can fatten up the sound like dual detuned VCOs would, while only using a single voice. Setting up a short delay can also lead to some interesting results, especially when you repeat the process multiple times. Cross-mixing finally is a way to mix two waveforms by blending or cross-mixing between both samples while they are played simultaneously. A nice way to play with this feature is to cross-mix between two drum loops to create new loops, or again, cross-blend between two identical samples that are detuned or have a short delay set to the second sample. Okay, I hope I gave you guys an idea about some of the things that can be achieved with the internal tools. There are a surprisingly large number of creative things that you can do with just these limited tools, and it was a lot of fun to try these out. While the workflow of course is more than a bit slow by today's standard, it was a surprisingly meditative experience for me to do things the old school way. Once again, if you haven't checked them out, go and have a look at my other FZ1 videos too. So long then, and see you soon with another synth.